Hi everyone, very happy to be live with Peter May. This is to do with the launch of your new book, Wintergrave. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself and your new book, Peter? Get us started.
Well, a winter grave. Yeah, I mean, the truth is that after what was my last book? The Nightgate. You see, you start to forget things very quickly. I mean, what was the title of your last book? Well, The Nightgate. I, uh, I I kind of figured it was time for me to take a bit of a backseat. Um, I know they say writers don't retire. Old writers don't retire; they just die. Hopefully, I'm not going to die just yet. But there were some things that I wanted to spend time doing. I wanted to spend some time. I have here a home recording studio, and music has been always a major part of my life, and so I wanted to spend more time doing some music. I wanted to spend time reading for the pleasure of reading rather than reading for research purposes, which is what most of my reading has been in the last few years. Um, and I turned down the contract offer from my publishers, and and I thought I was going to slip quietly into um, a nice, happy retirement. But of course, fate took a turn, and it all turned on its head because when now just over a year ago, so it would be November 2021, I was following progress at COP26 in Glasgow, and that's the climate conference, international climate conference, and just not long before that, I'd read a digest of the latest report of the IPCC, which is the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And it was a scary, scary, scary report. It was saying, we have to do something within this decade or we're heading for disaster. So I was very expectant about what the, politicians and officials from around the world were going to do and achieve at COP26. And of course, they didn't. They copped out. Uh, Victims to a large extent of the fossil fuel lobbyists. Um, COP27, just at the end of last year, there in Egypt, there were more fossil fuel lobbyists at that COP than there were representatives of developing nations. And you have to ask yourself, why are fossil fuel lobbyists attending conferences on climate change? Because they want to influence the outcome, of course, and they want to influence the outcome in their favor, i.e., they want to continue exploiting oil and gas and coal and pumping CO2 into the atmosphere because that's where they make their money. And to hell with the rest of us because, the world can go down the tubes for all they care. And I ended up at the end of the COP26. I was, to use an old Scottish expression, I was boiling. I was furious. And I still had no thoughts about writing a book, but I sat down and started doing research. I thought I've got to educate myself about this. And I spent 3 solid months researching climate change, the science, the pros, the cons, everything about it. I mean, I read literally hundreds of reports and articles, watched hours and hours of video interviews and documentaries. And at the end of it, I was more convinced than ever that we were heading towards tragedy, disaster. And I thought, what can I do about it? A lone voice in this growling sea of humanity. How can I be heard? Well, I thought, well, maybe as a sort of best-selling crime author, I have a little bit more volume to my voice than most people. So I should use that. So I've got to write about it. And of course, the problem was, how do you write about climate change? I mean, it's this huge scientific subject, very complex. I mean, how do you encompass that in a dramatic way in the context of a crime story? Because after all, I'm a crime writer, and so I toiled over that for a while, and then the realization came to me that actually I wouldn't write about climate change at all. I would write a classic crime thriller, political thriller. I would set it in my home country, Scotland, but I would set it 30 years from now, when the world has been changed as a result of the climate crisis. And that backdrop to the story would be my contribution to awareness, if you like, in general in the world. So that's what I did, because I don't want to preach to anybody. Nobody wants to pick up a book and be preached at or have facts and figures thrown in their faces. They want to pick up a book and enjoy a good story. In this case, a good crime thriller with characters that they can identify with and empathize with, and so in the end, that's what I did.
It's not your first novel either, is it? With that thread of kind of environmental consciousness. I'm thinking of the one you wrote with the bees, and the flight of the bees in as well.
That's right, Coffin Road. Yeah, I mean, I've been interested in environmental themes for a long time. I mean, the first of my China thrillers, The Firemaker, was about the genetic modification of foods and that going wrong and releasing a virus into the world. I've always been interested in these kind of issues, subjects, medical, scientific, environmental. And of course, lockdown, which was, I suppose, the classic. Well, at the time I wrote it, people thought it was science fiction in 2005, but 15 years later, it turned out to be science fact. But I think you have to, if you're going to write from the heart, and that's what I want to do, and I've always wanted to, is write from the heart. Then you have to write about subjects that interest you and inflame your passions.
I interviewed Greg Moss before Christmas, and his book has been branded as cli-fi or climate fiction, and he quite liked that. Do you think it's important to kind of educate people through fiction about messages like this?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say, because years ago I used to work in television. I was a storyliner and script editor in soap opera, and the one thing that we always said was that an issue isn't a story. People would come to story conferences and say, let's do a story about this issue, or let's do a story about that issue. And I would say, but where's the story? An issue isn't a story. And so when it comes to writing about something like climate change, that's an issue. And in a way, I don't want to write about an issue. I want to write about a human story. I want a human story, but here's the backdrop to it. Here's the backcloth. Here's the context. And that makes all the difference. And yes, I think it's, if somebody is writing about something that they're passionate about, then I think that comes across in the telling of the story.
It very much does. I'm interested in your sort of, that you're kind of quietly retiring after the Nightgate, and thinking about what happens in A Wintergrave. You sort of left it. It's a very standalone book, isn't it?
It's a very standalone book, and if the subtext of that question is, are you going to write another one? I couldn't tell you. I mean, I had no intention of, 18 months ago, if you'd said to me, are you going to write another book? I'd have said no. So if anything, if I've learned anything from the process of writing A Wintergrave, it is never say never. So the wonderful thing about not having a contract and a deadline is that it takes away all the pressure. Because if you have a 3-book deal and you have to produce a book here, and 12 months later you have to produce another book, and I mean, that's a lot of pressure. And I don't necessarily thrive under that kind of pressure, or maybe I do, but I don't particularly like it. And so taking the pressure away gives me a certain kind of freedom that I think I haven't had before, to say, I'm not going to write about anything until an idea comes to me. And then I'll be full of passion and vigor, and and I've got no contract to live up to. I've got no publisher breathing down my neck saying, "Here's the deadline." I can just do it because I want to do it.
Which must be wonderful.
Yes.
We've got some hellos. So Sam has said hello, Donna has said hello, so has Carolyn and Laura. They've got questions. Before we get to that, the other one I wanted to ask you about is, you've talked about your love of music. It comes through in Runaway as well, doesn't it? You've got a lot of music in there. But you've got a song that goes with this.
Yes. Yeah, it was something last summer. I mean, I'd written the book, and I knew publication was coming up in January, and I thought it would be nice to have a song, an anthem, to go with the theme of the book. Maybe I could write something. Now, I mean, I have my studio here. I mean, it's you can't really see it, but I've got lights and sliders and all sorts of stuff in front of me here, and there's a window through into the recording room, the live room, and I record with other musicians and write stuff, and I have an album very near completion, and I thought, well, let's write a song. I have this friend, Dennis McCoy, who's from Northern Ireland, who I collaborate with on the writing of lyrics. You might think it's odd that a writer doesn't write his own song lyrics, but lyrics, it's like poetry, isn't it? And it's a very different kind of skill from prose writing, novel writing. And Dennis is somebody who's been writing poetry all his life, and so I've been collaborating with him on lyrics for the songs, and he's very good. And so I said to him, let's think about doing a song about the climate crisis, and we discussed what the lyrics should convey. And he lives next to me here in France, but he spends half his time back home in Ireland, and he'd gone off to Ireland, and he came back in September, and he'd written this lyric, and he read it to me, and I just felt all the hairs in the back of my neck stand up, and I thought, that's perfect. And I took the lyrics into the studio here the next day, and the song literally wrote itself. Within an hour, it was written, and then we spent the next couple of months getting all the musicians together and recording the tracks, and we got a children's choir up on the Isle of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides to sing the chorus. So it's collaboration from all over, and the song's called "Don't Burn the World," and it's going to be available for download or streaming on all the major platforms from Saturday. And we made a video, and the video is already up on YouTube and Vimeo, so anybody can see that and access that. The song, the aim of the song is not to make money. If by some quirk of fate it did make any cash, it will all be donated to charity. So it's not about money, it's about the message.
I'm hoping that Sam, who's watching, will go and post a link to the song while we're talking.
Oh, that would be great.
I had a little listen to it before we went live.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, because Janice had mentioned it, your wife mentioned it in the group when I'd sort of put my review in the book, and I hadn't had a chance to listen until tonight. And I thought it would inspire me for the chat. Patricia has said hello. She's hoping to come and see you in Edinburgh. Do you want to tell us about the rest of your like physical tour dates that you're doing.
Yeah, well, that'd be great. Look forward to seeing you in Edinburgh. Did you say Patricia?
Hmm.
Yes. Look forward to seeing you in Edinburgh, Patricia. Um, yeah, I head off to London on Sunday, and I'm there for a week, and that's mostly, it's all the interviews, press and radio and TV interviews and all that kind of stuff gets done on that first week. And on the book gets published on the 19th. Oh, that's the Thursday. And that day, launch day, doing an event at Hatchards in Piccadilly. So anybody in London, you're very welcome to come along to that. And then the following week, head up to Scotland, and I'm doing a number of events up there. Well, every night. I'm Glasgow on the Monday, Inverness on the Tuesday, Perth on the Wednesday, St Andrews on the Thursday, Edinburgh on the Friday, and there's also a couple of signings, one in Dundee and another one in Edinburgh. So that's all going on the second week of the tour.
Patricia says she'll be dressed in our group's colours, which are black, like yellow, and black, so you won't miss her.
So like a bumblebee, I'll
Yeah.
I'll be able to spot her in the crowd. Yes.
Yeah, you won't miss her. She's she'll definitely be there. I'm gonna scroll back up because Sam had a really good question for you. She wanted to know how you keep things fresh for yourself as well as the readers after such a long and successful writing career.
How do you keep things fresh? It's about being invested in your story and your characters. About it's there's a danger, of course, always when you're contracted to write books that you just write the book because there's a contract there. I've never kind of been like that. I mean, in the days when I worked in television, you were always under huge amounts of pressure to produce. When I was doing the soap opera, Scottish soap, Take the High Road, we were doing 104 episodes a year. And I mean, that kind of output is enormous and the pressures are huge. And yet, the thing that drives you always is the desire to do the best you can and to tell the best story you can tell and to entertain people. You'd be very disappointed if you wrote something or made a TV show and people didn't like it. You want them to like it. You want them to feel good about it. And so that's a huge incentive. It's you never just turn the handle or pedal the pedals and churn it out. Because I think as soon as you do that, you're dead, and readers would know immediately that your heart wasn't in it. So it's about being invested in your story and your characters, and also in your readers.
And I think one of the things that really comes across, especially in sort of things like A Winter Grave, is just your love of the landscape of Scotland as well.
Mm. Well, yeah, I mean, Scotland. I've been very fortunate to have been born in, I think, one of the most beautiful countries in the world. And as a kid, and we never used to go foreign holidays. We always went holidays in Scotland. We got in the car and we went off. Me and my mum and dad, my sister, and we would stay in funny little bread and breakfast places all over Scotland, and we got to know the country so well, and you get to feel really invested in it. This is my homeland. This is my country. I'm proud of it. It's what a wonderful place it is. And all through my life, I've had that sense of Scotland as being a wonderful place, and you want to share that with people. You want to share that with your readers and try and convey to them what it is that you love so much about the country, and the topography, the geography, the whole atmosphere of it. So that's always been a kind of drive. But I mean, that's true of everywhere I set a book. I want to convey to the reader that sense of place that I have experienced.
I think it really comes across. Have you ever had anyone contact you and say they've been inspired to travel there by your books?
I, I'm my my Facebook and Twitter timelines are absolutely full of people from all over the world who have travelled to the Outer Hebrides because of the Lewis trilogy, and it's quite extraordinary in a way. And you know, every time I go back to the Hebrides, it's it's extraordinary because you know, I meet all the tourist organizations. I meet, you know, folk in the pubs and in the restaurants and stuff, and they all say, you know, we've had a flood of people here again this year because of your books. At an event that I had in France this a number of years ago now, somebody actually turned up at the event with a glass vial full of sand from Port of Ness on the Isle of Lewis, where they had gone because they'd read the book and they thought I would be interested in this vial of sand. But I thought it was interesting that you know, people would go to those lengths, and they do. Literally from all over the world. People, I mean, tourism and on the Outer Hebrides has gone through the roof. It's unbelievable.
Because yeah, it's not the easiest place to get to from some parts of the world either. I would
No.
That's amazing. I'm a particular fan of the China thrillers. I've got to admit that you're right. Would you ever be tempted to revisit that series?
Do you know, not really. I think I wrote the last of those books nearly 20 years ago now. The characters will be getting on for elderly now, I think. But also, I think, you know, when I was writing about China back then, it was at the turn of the century. It was late 90s into the early 2000s, and China was changing radically. I mean, I'd been there 10 years earlier, and 10 years on, the change was startling. And it was almost coming out of the Middle Ages into some kind of 21st century future. And things have, I mean, things were very optimistic back then when I was writing about China, about the way the country was going and the way that it was developing. I met a lot of people who were invested in changing China and developing it for a new future and in rewriting its constitution. And sadly, I think it's gone backwards since then. You know, that period of great change and great optimism has kind of spun backwards, well, certainly politically. And I'm not sure that I would want to go back now. I was very invested in China at the time. I loved the place, absolutely loved the place. I loved the people, and I loved writing about it. But I think, I don't know, that I don't think I would want to go back now.
Is there anywhere in the world that you have travelled to that you would like to write about that you haven't already done so?
Oh. I don't know. I mean, there's so many different places that I've been. One of the places that I was most unexpectedly drawn to was Australia. We about, I can't know, 4 or 5 years ago now, 6 years ago maybe, did a book tour in Australia and New Zealand, and I was blown away by Australia, and I thought it was a fantastic country. It was kind of like California, you know, on steroids. It had such optimism and energy, and yeah, I mean, I guess I would quite like to write something about that country, about that sense of optimism and energy that seemed to me to be lacking in Europe. Certainly, that Europe seemed very by comparison, very downbeat, very depressed almost. And Australia was really on this upward curve. And I found that quite energizing, and maybe quite inspirational.
Going back to the Wintergrave, sorry. What can you tell us about Cameron, your main character?
Cameron Brodie is well, I mean, for anybody who's not read it, you have to kind of understand that it takes place in two timelines. One is set in 2051, which is the setting for the main story. It's like now, if you like. And the backstory takes us back to 2023, like our now. And we see his history and his development, which leads him to be the person that he is now in 2051. He's a man who has lost his wife, who is estranged from his daughter, who's regarded as a bit of a dinosaur in the Scottish police, one of the old guard, and because he's a man now, in his 50s, and he's sent off to investigate the discovery of a body in a mountain above Kinlochleven in the West Highlands of Scotland. And he's chosen to go because he has a history as somebody who has gone hill walking and mountain climbing over the years. But he has another personal reason for agreeing to go, and that's to try and make amends with his estranged daughter, who lives in Kinlochleven, and as it turns out, is the person who discovered the body which sparks the investigation. This is a body which is encased in ice in one of the northeast facing gullies of a mountain above Kinlochleven. And for him, it's not only an investigation, but it's a voyage towards potential redemption. I think, as with all my stories, I hope it's about people and relationships, and character, and I think that's what people identify with, readers identify with, more than anything else.
Have you had anyone sort of picking up a kind of a favorite character in the book yet? Have you had people messaging you saying that they really love a particular?
Well, I mean, to be honest, most people haven't read it yet. It's only a few reviewers and who've had access to the book. So I haven't had really any kind of general feedback from readers, which I'm looking forward to. But I mean, I've had terrific feedback from the reviewers who've read the book so far. Whether they've got favorite characters or not, I'm not sure, but we'll see.
I do. I read it.
Yeah.
I particularly like the pathologist.
Sita.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Definitely my favorite.
I had a lot of fun with Sita and her relationship with Cameron. That was a very enjoyable period of writing the book, was developing those two characters and their relationship and their arrival at the hotel, which is a bit like a spectre from The Shining. But yeah. I liked Sita too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I was asking. I was like, I wonder if anyone else has said that they really like. They really like Sita. She's a great.
Well, and my editor really liked Sita. He was extolling her virtues.
Oh, there you go. See, me and your editor.
Yeah.
Sam wants to know, if you could choose a character of your own to play on TV or film, who would you choose?
But for me to play,
Yeah.
I couldn't play anybody. I'd be the world's worst actor. Um, um, uh, if there was a TV series of the Enzo books, I might suggest that I could possibly play Enzo, since he's so very closely related to me. But beyond that, I mean, nobody would cast me. Nobody in the right mind would cast me to play anybody in anything.
I don't know. You could do a lot of writers do. I don't. Well, not a lot, but there are people who are tempted to make an appearance, aren't there, in the adaptation of their books. Terry
Well, yeah,
Pratchett always used to appear somewhere in his adaptations.
see a lot of writers making kind of guest appearances that last 5 seconds in things, and that would be fine. I don't mind that. I'm not going to crack any lenses if I'm a long way in the background and and only on screen for 5 seconds. That would be okay.
Someone on here has agreed about you playing Enzo. They'd love to see that. Apparently, I love Enzo. Leslie wants to know if you have a favorite character in A Wintergrave.
If I have a favorite character in The Wintergrave, well, it's hard to say because when you're writing, you tend to identify very closely with all the characters that you write, whether they're goodies or baddies. I mean, even the bad characters, you kind of get inside their heads because you have to know what makes them tick. So you start to identify with and understand them in a way. So it's hard to say that I would have a favorite character.
Did
Um,
any of
uh,
them really surprise you then, as you were writing them and getting inside the head? Did any of them sort of do something that really took you by surprise?
well, I mean, Cameron Brodie was, in a way, he was always surprising me. He took me on a journey that I didn't really expect to be going on when I started developing that story and taking him on his journey. He ended up taking me on a journey that was quite unexpected. Yeah, but his daughter Addie too. I mean, I was very fond of her.
Yeah. Though, I mean, like you said, that you aim to do with your books about them being about characters. All of the characters in there are,
Mm.
I genuinely feel like very real people. So you can sort of
Yeah,
see their motivations and things, even if they're not the best.
yes. I mean, even the baddies have got to be three-dimensional.
Mm.
They're because they're all human beings, for better or worse. And there's usually some reason for why they end up being who and what they are.
And I think the interesting thing in crime fiction is often exploring those reasons for why they've ended up
Well,
the way
yeah, I
they
mean, crime fiction absolutely gives you that opportunity to explore people in a way that maybe other kind of fiction doesn't, because uh, crime places ordinary people under extraordinary pressure in unexpected circumstances, and that gives you as a writer the chance to explore all of those things, and learn a lot more about people, and what makes them tick.
There's some quite interesting bits of kind of future technology in the book as well. Did you have fun inventing those, or are they an accurate prediction of what you think might be coming up?
Well, yeah, I did a lot, because it's. I mean, I did the future thing because I wanted to portray what the world might be like in 30 years with climate change, but it meant I also had to explore what the world might look like in all sorts of other ways. and technology was one of those things. I did a lot of research, and in the book, the cops have just been issued with this new headset thing, glasses and thing that fits into the ear, and that's called an ICOM, and that's very much based upon stuff that is in development at the moment and is very likely to come on stream in the next 2-3 decades. The eVTOL, the electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles, which are basically just big drones that carry passengers, they are currently in development. And I just read a piece the other day about the Paris Olympics. They're planning to have exactly these kind of eVTOLs that flying people backwards and forwards between Charles de Gaulle Airport and the center of Paris. And so that stuff's not really very far away at all. And so all this stuff that I explore in the book is very much based on what's in development now and is almost certainly going to come to us in the future, the very near future.
And I think that's interesting because you also explore, I'm trying not to give away any spoilers, you explore sort of things that are happening now, but in the technology of the future.
Yeah, I mean that's the important thing is that you're not just making it all up. I mean, I guess back in the days when they were making things like Star Trek, they just made up all that stuff about beam me up, Scotty. You know, the handheld gizmos that they had, and and they just that was pure invention. And the scientists who were watching those shows said, "Hey, that would be great. Let's see if we can develop something like that." And they did, ultimately. But that we came through a different era then. Now technology moves so rapidly that it's all about just looking at what's in development now, and projecting it just that little bit into the future and saying this is what it could be like.
And it works again really well. So the little hints of there's not a lot of it, is there? It reads like a crime novel set now, but with those little hints of the future. I think.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I also looked at was, because I'd been looking at the whole climate issue, was nuclear power. And it's interesting because I live in France, and 70% of electricity in France is generated by nuclear power. They, decades ago, they went down the road of going for nuclear as a way of generating electricity. Britain was very half-hearted about it. And currently you have it in Scotland. The Scottish government is 100% against nuclear. The government in Westminster is for it, and there are a couple of major nuclear power stations in development at the moment. And a lot of people are saying, well, for all the problems that nuclear energy is associated with, waste, radioactive waste being the primary problem, it's not contributing to climate change. It's not pumping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. The problem is how you deal with the nuclear waste. And in the book, there is a nuclear power station, and that was very much based on something that's been built in Finland, where they tunneled down 0.5 kilometer below the power station and dug out this network of tunnels in which they buried the nuclear waste, and it's going to be there for eternity. But it's a permanent, it's not a temporary solution. It's permanent. Once it's in there and it's sealed in this stuff, it's the tunnels are sealed off and sealed off and sealed off. So these are issues that are going to arise for sure over the next 20, 30 years. they're even talking about these small nuclear power generators. I mean, about the size of a room, which could be set all over the place, and there's an economy of scale here. It can generate huge amounts of power. I don't know how realistic that is, but people are talking about it as if it's something that may actually be adopted.
It's like an interesting thought. I did know the way that they've done that in Finland
Mm.
with the drilling down, because it's quite an interesting solution.
Yeah.
You've got another question coming, and you've been asked if you've ever changed something about a character in the editing process.
In the editing process, no.
Mm.
My editing process is different from a lot of other writers. A lot of writers sit down and they'll have an idea, a vague idea to start with, and they just start on page one and they write. And it's flying by the seat of your pants, if you like, and they get to the end of the book, and then they go through serious revisions. I mean, they'll rewrite large sections, and characters will change. And I don't work that way at all. Because I write a very detailed synopsis of my story before I sit down to write, and I think that is something that I borrowed from my years working in television, where I would write a scene by scene by scene by scene structure of the story from beginning to end. And it's about 25,000 words long. And that's a very containable size. If I have problems in the story structure or I have problems with the characters, I can deal with it within that synopsis. And once I've dealt with it in there, I can then write the book with this freedom of knowing that I have this as a safety net. And yes, of course, things develop and change as you're actually writing, but for the most part, you have this basis for the whole book already set. And so I find that when I finish writing the book, I don't do 2, 3, 4, 5 drafts of the book. I do one draft of the book, and when it's finished, I do a polish edit on it, and that's it. I never want to see it again. It's gone.
Do you not get like edits back after you've sent it off, or
From the publisher?
Yeah.
Very rarely. I mean, I'll get little minor notes from my editor, but not. I mean, never anything major. Nobody's ever said, "Oh, this character's not working," or "This part of the plot doesn't work. You need to change this or that." No, that doesn't happen. If I guess if somebody came back, if an editor came back to me and said, "I don't think this is working," I'd chuck it away. I'd say, "Okay, I'll start again. I'll do something else." It's I'm not a great believer in being able to fix things like that. If something is fundamentally flawed in the first place, you can tinker with it all you like. It's always going to remain fundamentally flawed. So I try and make sure it's not fundamentally flawed before I start writing it.
Have you ever had to do? I was talking to an author yesterday, and they said that they essentially didn't bring out a book like 1 year because they'd got to the point where they'd finished it and they couldn't fix it. Like there was something so flawed in it, they couldn't fix it, so they just binned it. Have you ever sort of got to a point where you've just binned a book and gone, no, that's it? Like it's not.
Never.
Never.
Never. Well, I wouldn't start writing a book until I was happy with the synopsis. If the synopsis wasn't working, then I wouldn't start the book. But a synopsis is a very fluid thing, and that's. I mean, for me, that's my synopses. The ones that I write are very, very. That's where the white heat of creativity takes place. That's where it's all happening for me, in terms of getting the shape of the story and the gist of the characters and the relationships. And if you get that right there, then when I go on to write the book, it's about just doing it justice. It's about bringing those characters to life, bringing the location to life, making the writing as good as I can make it. And I wouldn't even begin on that process if I couldn't get the synopsis to work.
So have you ever had a synopsis that hasn't worked? You've just been, oh.
Actually, no. when I think about it, no, because the thing, I mean, I've had synopsis that have been difficult, that have thrown up problems, but because it's a synopsis, because it's small and containable, it's always possible to fix it or rethink things. And so I've never got to a stage with a synopsis that I thought this isn't working, and thrown it away. If there's been something that's not working, I have found a way to fix it and to make it work. So that's just me. It's just the way I work.
It's a really fascinating way of working, though. It sounds really interesting. Do you
Well,
write quite quickly, do you think? Is that has left out, because you work so long in television, do you, once you've got that synopsis, do you write quite fast?
I write very fast, yes. It's partially it's because of, the pressure, writing under pressure, working for television, but a lot of that comes from my days working as a journalist, where you had no time to write stuff. I mean, you were always under the cosh. You always had a deadline, and a limited number of words to work with. So it taught you how to write fast. It taught you economy of language. And when I sit down to write a book now, I get up at 6 in the morning. I write 3,000 words a day, and the book's done in 7 weeks.
That's impressive. Can you write anywhere as well? Is that
Yeah,
a lot of the journalists I've interviewed can just write anywhere.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you can write in a crazy newsroom, you can write anywhere. I mean, yeah, newsrooms back in the day. I mean, I don't know what it's like now because everything's online, but in the old days when you were, working to daily deadlines and there were hot metal presses waiting for your words of wisdom, newsrooms were frantic, noisy, crazy places. Things were getting thrown about. People were shouting. Phones were going. Typewriters were hammering away. In a way, I find it easier to write in that kind of atmosphere than to write when there's no noise in a quiet room somewhere. The silence is all enveloping. It's commanding in a way. Whereas if you've got this madness going on around you, then you've got something to shut out, and that kind of helps your focus and your concentration. I like to write in my study at home. That's my preferred place, but I have written on trains and planes and railway stations and all sorts of places. And I don't mind that if I have to do that to meet my daily quota of 3,000 words, I'll do it.
Are you when you're writing, are you a silence or a kind of a? Because you've got an impressive array of CDs behind you. Do you like to write to music?
I don't play music when I'm writing, for the simple reason that music affects my mood. And the wrong kind of music while I'm writing would steer that writing and the flavor and the mood of the writing in the wrong direction. So I don't do it because I don't want it to influence the writing.
That's interesting. I use music to change my mood.
Yeah.
As well, yeah.
Well, I mean, music's great for changing your mood, but maybe you don't want it to if you're in the middle of writing something.
No, definitely. I can imagine that you wouldn't if you were in the middle of writing. Because if you make the wrong choice, you could end up with a dramatically different.
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
What you were intending. Sorry. One of my favorite questions to ask, and I don't know if I've ever asked you this before, but I do love to ask it, is would you ever make a graphic novel version of one of your books?
I wouldn't personally. I mean, if somebody wanted to do it, I'd be quite happy for them to do it. I think probably the Enzo books would lend themselves to that better than any of the others. And since they're set in France, and France is the kind of home of the graphic novel, bande dessinée as they're called here. It would probably work quite well. I've met, when I do a lot of these book events around France, there's always bande dessinée guys there, the artists and the writers, and they get huge crowds waiting to get their books dédicacés, as they call them in France. They don't just sign them, the guys who do the bande dessinée, the graphic novels. They do a whole piece of artwork on the inside cover, specifically for the person who's coming looking for a signature. Sometimes it can take 15 or 20 minutes, and the queues will stretch right along the hall, and people are very patient because they know they're going to get some unique piece of artwork at the end of it, which is quite fascinating. So I think I would like to see Enzo's graphic novel.
It probably would work really well. And like you said, France is a kind of home of. They're very embracing of that genre, aren't they?
Oh, very, yeah, very. When I first came to France, I used to be amazed that adults read what seemed to be like comic books. I'm going, and took them very seriously. And then, of course, you realize that they're much more than comic books. But it was a totally different culture, and very interesting.
Well, we're on to the adaptations. Has anyone ever been interested in adapting your work?
Oh, on numerous occasions, yes. For the most part, I've said no. Mostly because I like the books the way they are. I don't particularly have any longing to see them adapted for the screen. I mean, I worked in television for 17 years. I've got no kind of illusions about, or ambitions to have something on the screen. I've had lots of stuff on the screen. My books are books. They're written to be read and enjoyed by a reader, and that's a kind of one-to-one relationship between you and the reader, the writer and the reader. The television or movies is a very different thing. It's a relationship between a team of people who make the movie and a huge audience who will watch it in cinemas or on streaming TV or whatever. So it's a different process, but I have had one of the China books was adapted for a movie by French producers, but probably the less said about that, the better.
Really? I'm intrigued now. Do you ever? I interviewed someone else who'd written a lot for TV, and they quite liked the fact that in their books they could do things that would be quite expensive.
Yes.
The film, because you can get away with it in fiction that you wouldn't get away with on TV.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you're very much restricted by space and cost for anything for the screen. Particularly for television. Movies with the big budgets can do all sorts of amazing things, but the kind of television I was writing, you were restricted in all sorts of ways: size of cast, size of set, how many sets you could have, how much exterior filming you could afford to do, as opposed to studio stuff. And but in a strange way, that was quite challenging and inspirational, because it made you think, how can I work around these restrictions? How can I make something work, even although we can't afford this and we can't afford that, and we can only have 2 actors here and we can only use this set? That's quite challenging, and you can get quite creative with that. But having said that, I love the freedom of being able to do whatever it is you want in a book. Cost is not an issue.
I guess that, yeah, you've had the joy of sort of seeing both worlds, really.
Yes. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. You have, and nobody else is telling you what to do. There are no other layers of interpretation involved. You don't have a director who sees your story this way, or actors who interpret your characters this way. So you as the writer of the book have total control. And the flip side of that coin is that the reader also has total control, because it doesn't matter what you as the writer visualized in your mind as you wrote the book. When the reader reads it, the reader will create their own pictures. The reader will create the setting. They will visualize the characters. It might be quite different from what you as the writer intended, but it makes it a very creative and interactive process between the reader and the written word. And I think that is much more satisfying than looking at something on the screen where everything has been provided for you. Every facet and aspect of that story and those characters have been thought out and drawn very carefully by other people and presented to you as a fait accompli. You have no participatory role in that. You are simply at the receiving end of it, like it or not. And I think the reading experience is totally the opposite of that, and is much more satisfying.
I would agree. I often will watch a trailer for a movie and then go buy the book of it,
Right.
rather than watch the actual film.
Yeah. Oh, quite. I mean, it would be impossible to put numbers on it, but I would say that the vast majority of TV or film adaptations of books that I have seen have not lived up to the book remotely. Really, one or two notable exceptions, but mostly they just don't.
No, you're right. We have 2 minutes left. It's been an absolute
Right.
pleasure chatting to you. Do you want to finish off with a reminder about your latest book, so people know what they're going to buy when it comes out? Because it's fantastic.
Great. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. It's a classic thriller. It's a political thriller. It's a murder mystery. It's set in the Scottish Highlands during a bleak winter with snow and ice storms, and it's, I think, full of atmosphere and intrigue, and a search for redemption. And I hope people will enjoy it.
They will definitely enjoy it. It's called Wintergrave, and it comes out on
19th of January. That's a week today, in fact.
yeah, so it comes out a week today. So keep your eye out. Get a pre-order in, maybe.
Yes, do it.
Now you've been watching. And thank you so much for coming and joining us. It's always a pleasure having you.
Thanks a lot, Kaz. Nice to be here. Nice to talk to a great and knowledgeable bunch of people.
There's some cracking members, but yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, thank you.